Megan Rhodes used to be a master at reading people, from strategy meetings and negotiation tables to high-stakes acquisition deals. But now, sitting at Gate 23 of Detroit Metro Airport, she realized there was one person she had never been able to read: her own little daughter. Zoe was signing. Not the simple gestures for hungry or tired that Megan had grown used to, but a chain of intricate emotional signs, something she couldn't understand, not even a little. Before she could open her phone to look it up, a man with kind eyes quietly knelt down beside them. His hands moved fluently, responding to Zoe in the very same language, the language of silence, yet it rang clearer than any spoken word. And then Zoe's face lit up. That glow, that joy. Megan hadn't seen it on her daughter's face for months. They were talking, really talking. The kind of conversation that made the whole world around them disappear, leaving only two souls connected through their hands. Megan froze. She was standing right there, yet she felt as if she were outside her own daughter's world. What was Zoe saying that made her laugh so brightly? And why did this stranger seem to understand her child so effortlessly? In that moment, Megan realized something painful. For 7 years, she hadn't been raising Zoe in the world of sign language. She had been forcing her to live in hers. A world where Zoe always had to slow down, always had to simplify her feelings just so her mother could keep up. But here, with this man, Zoe didn't have to wait. Zoe could simply be herself. And that was when Megan Rhodes, product director at Lakefront Media Labs, the woman who had steered her company through the fiercest corporate storms, suddenly felt herself completely frozen. Because for the first time, she truly saw her daughter, and realized just how blind she had been all this time. If you believe that love isn't only in the words we say, but in the way we listen, hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories that touch the heart. But what happens when that flight, and that stranger, change the lives of Megan and Zoe forever? Let's begin with the flight to Traverse City. The flight to Traverse City had been Megan's idea, though she couldn't quite remember when exactly her desperation had turned into an actual plan. Maybe it was after her third therapy session, when the therapist gently said, "You need to meet Zoe where she is, not keep trying to pull her up to where you are." Or maybe it was during the custody mediation, when Scott's lawyer repeated the phrase, "communication barrier," 6 times. Each time she heard it, Megan felt as if someone had punched her straight in the gut. Communication barrier. It sounded as though the issue were merely a physical wall, not the painful truth that she, as a mother, had never spent enough time truly learning her own daughter's language. Whatever the reason, the result was this. She had booked 2 tickets to Traverse City. 1 week away from everything, just her and Zoe. No interpreter, no assistant, no buffer between them. That thought terrified her more than any board presentation ever had. Zoe sat cross-legged on the stiff airport bench, her purple turtle-shaped backpack resting against her legs. She had owned that backpack since she was 4. Even though Megan had tried to buy her newer, more grown-up ones, Zoe had always refused to switch. The fabric was worn thin now, one strap clumsily stitched where it had torn last summer. Megan had been the one to sew it. Late one night at the kitchen table, watching a muted YouTube tutorial so she wouldn't wake Zoe up. A small, ordinary moment, yet one of the few times she'd felt like she was actually getting motherhood right. The waiting area buzzed with the usual Friday evening chaos. Families eager for vacations, business travelers glued to their laptops, and a group of college students clinking overpriced beers from the bar across the concourse, their laughter drowning out the announcements. Zoe quietly observed it all, her eyes moving slowly, taking in every small detail that Megan would have easily missed. She had always been that way, meticulous, sensitive, and silent. It was the pediatrician who had first noticed. At 6 months old, Zoe tracked movement around her, but startled at vibrations rather than sound. By her first birthday, they had the diagnosis: severe bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. Megan had memorized every syllable of that phrase, as if mastering the medical term could somehow soothe the terror inside her. It didn't. Still, they tried to adapt. Megan threw herself into learning American Sign Language, with the same intensity and discipline she applied to everything else in her life. She hired deaf tutors, bought every textbook, downloaded every learning app, even joined a Tuesday night parent support group. During the first year, she was committed. She signed everything, narrated her day in ASL, plastered the house with notes and sign illustrations, even replaced their doorbell with a vibration system. Scott had tried too, for a while. But while ASL was a language to master for Megan, it was merely a temporary fix for Scott. A crutch until, as he said, they could fix the problem. The arguments began small at first. Should they pursue cochlear implants? How much speech therapy versus full ASL immersion? Was it fair, Scott asked, to let Zoe grow up in what he called a limited world? Looking back, Megan understood now. Their marriage had ended long before the divorce papers were signed. They were simply signing in two different languages. And neither of them was truly listening to the other. Now, watching Zoe's small hands move in intricate patterns she could only partially understand, Megan felt the full weight of her failures. Yes, she had learned ASL, but only enough to get by. Enough to ask whether Zoe wanted apples or oranges, whether she'd done her homework, if she was tired, cold, or needed the restroom. That wasn't the language of love. It was the language of survival. And somewhere between the whirlwind of work and responsibility, in the relentless climb that turned Lakefront Media Labs from a tiny startup into an 8-figure company, she had stopped learning, stopped improving, stopped reaching into her daughter's world. She had told herself, "It's fine." Zoe had interpreters at school. They still texted. They still FaceTimed. They still talked. But now, looking back, Megan saw the vast canyon between communication and connection. And only now did she truly understand how deep that abyss really was. Zoe's hands suddenly stopped, and she looked up at her mother, her eyes shimmering with an unspoken question. Megan recognized the sign for where and maybe what time, but the rest came too quickly. A blur of gestures, a rain of signs she simply couldn't keep up with. She reached for her phone, intending to type her response, when a shadow fell over them. "Excuse me," a voice said, warm, slightly raspy, the kind of voice that sounded like it had told many long stories. I couldn't help but notice. Megan looked up. Standing in front of her was a man who kept just enough distance not to intrude. He looked to be in his 40s, dark brown hair streaked with silver, tanned skin, the mark of someone who spent plenty of time outdoors. He wore jeans, a faded Patagonia jacket, and scuffed leather boots. Not stylish, but real. Everything about him seemed to say, "I don't belong in your world." Or at least, not in the world of glass offices and grand boardrooms that Megan was used to. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Eyes lined with faint wrinkles, the kind that come from laughing often and living honestly. And he was smiling, not at Megan, but at Zoe. He slowly knelt down, gently, carefully, like someone approaching a shy cat, and lifted his hands. Megan froze, watching as his fingers began to move. A SL. but not the rigid, textbook-perfect signs she had learned from videos and manuals. His movements were fluid, rhythmic, alive, the kind of signing that came from the heart, not the head. He was asking Zoe about her turtle-shaped backpack, and in an instant, Zoe's whole face lit up. Her small hands began to dance, fast, graceful, full of excitement, so quick that Megan could only catch fragments, something about sea turtles, swimming, and a book she once read. The man laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that rang through the busy terminal, turning a few heads. Then he signed something that made Zoe burst into silent laughter, her tiny shoulders shaking, her eyes glowing with pure joy. Something tightened in Megan's chest. When was the last time she'd made Zoe laugh like that? When was the last time they'd truly talked, instead of just exchanging information? The man looked up at her, his smile softening into one of gentle understanding. "Sorry, I should have introduced myself first," he said, switching to spoken English. "I'm James Walker." I saw her signing and thought, maybe I could just say hello. My daughter's deaf, too. He stood and offered his hand. Megan shook it almost automatically, her professional instinct kicking in, even as her thoughts scrambled to catch up. "Megan Rhodes. And this is Zoe, he repeated, signing her name with an easy smile. "That's a beautiful name. It means life." Zoe nodded eagerly and signed a long, animated string of gestures. James raised his brows, his eyes lighting up. "Oh, your mom picked it?" He looked at Megan. "That's a wonderful choice. Life? Something resilient, unbreakable, that always finds a way to survive and grow, even under the harshest conditions." His gaze carried quiet admiration. "That's a very meaningful name." Megan felt her cheeks grow warm. She had once said those exact words. In a tiny hospital room, 2 hours after Zoe was born. She could still picture herself holding her newborn, counting each tiny finger. When the nurse asked for the baby's name, Scott had wanted something more traditional, Catherine or Elizabeth. But Megan had insisted on Zoe, because life never gives up. It endures pressure, adapts, and then shines. She had believed that name would be her daughter's shield. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice slightly hoarse. "Are you traveling with your daughter?" James shook his head. A flicker of shadow crossed his eyes, so fleeting that Megan couldn't name it. "No, Harper's in Traverse City with her grandmother. I had a few days of work in Detroit, and now I'm flying back." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, if you don't mind, could I sit with you for a bit? The flight's delayed about 90 minutes, and it's rare to meet another ASL family. Harper doesn't often get to chat with other deaf kids." Megan should have said no. She didn't know this man. A cautious part of her whispered about strangers. But Zoe gently patted the seat beside her, her eyes bright with hope. Signing one simple word Megan understood instantly. "Please." And in James's face, there was something quietly trustworthy. Or maybe, Megan thought, she was simply desperate for anyone. Someone who could speak to her daughter in the way she no longer could. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice calm. "We'd love some company." James sat down, moving with an ease that made it seem as if he already belonged in that space. Within seconds, he and Zoe were deep in lively conversation. Megan sat beside them, silently watching, trying to follow along, but she understood only a third of it. Zoe was talking about school, her art class, and something that had happened during recess. James listened with the kind of attentiveness few adults ever gave children, engaging with his eyes, nodding, smiling, asking questions with his hands and face. And Megan realized it had been so long since she'd seen Zoe like this. completely free, completely herself. James took out his phone, opened his photo library, and showed Zoe a picture. From her angle, Megan could see it was a photo of a little girl, about 9 or 10 years old, grinning wide, a gap where one tooth was missing, her hands frozen mid-sign. Zoe's eyes lit up. She began signing rapidly, her fingers moving so fast they blurred into streaks of light. "Zoe's asking if she can video call Harper," James translated, glancing toward Megan for permission. "That's my daughter. They both want to meet each other." Once again, Megan felt her heart tighten. Zoe wanted so badly to meet another deaf child that she had to rely on the father of a stranger, simply because she didn't have those connections in her everyday life. When was the last time Zoe had even mentioned a friend from school? When was the last time Megan had arranged a playdate, or asked about her daughter's life outside of class, instead of just asking the interpreter whether Zoe was adjusting well? "Of course," Megan said, her voice raspier than she intended. "That sounds wonderful." James began setting up the call with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Within seconds, Harper's face appeared on the screen. Warm brown eyes, a bright, toothy smile, the spitting image of her father. The moment Harper saw Zoe, her hands started to move. Excited, fast, alive. Zoe responded just as quickly, her fingers flying so swiftly they nearly disappeared. James held the phone steady, occasionally adding a small sign or two, but mostly letting the two girls talk. Megan sat there, watching, witnessing something that felt almost like transformation. This wasn't the Zoe she saw at home. The careful, patient little girl who always slowed down so her mother could keep up. This was Zoe unrestrained. Zoe vibrant. Zoe fully herself. Their conversation went on for nearly 15 minutes. The girls talked about everything: favorite colors, whether dragons were real, what they wanted to be when they grew up. Then Harper signed something that made Zoe burst into silent laughter, throwing her head back, her whole body trembling with joy. Megan felt her nose sting. Tears welled at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, hoping no one noticed. When the call ended, Zoe stayed there, her face glowing like sunlight. She turned to her mother, hands moving fast, her expression vivid and animated. Megan tried to follow, catching only fragments. Friend? Fun? Maybe? Summer. The rest washed past her like waves. She looked to James, her eyes almost pleading. He was still seated calmly, a faint smile on his lips. "She's asking," he translated, "if she can visit Harper this summer. There's a camp for deaf kids in Michigan that Harper goes to every year. Zoe really wants to go." He hesitated briefly, then continued, slower this time. "Zoe also said there aren't any other deaf kids at her school. Just a few hearing classmates who know a little bit of signing." The words hit Megan like a blow. Zoe's school did have a program for deaf and hard-of-hearing students. That was precisely why they'd chosen it. Top-tier equipment, certified interpreters, small classes, an environment where everyone used ASL. But apparently, a program didn't mean a community. Apparently, her daughter had been lonely in ways Megan had never even noticed. "I didn't know," she whispered, almost to herself. "About friends. She never said anything." James looked at her, his voice gentle but firm enough to make her chest ache. "Did you ask?" Megan opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Had she ever really asked? Had she ever opened a conversation wide enough for Zoe to feel safe sharing anything real? Or had she just been checking boxes, the routine checklist of a busy parent? School okay? Homework done? Any problems? All questions that could be answered with a simple yes or no. The simplest signs she was sure she knew. she hadn't been talking to her daughter. She'd been conducting a daily report with her own 6-year-old. Before the guilt could swallow her whole, her phone started vibrating again. Scott's name lit up on the screen. Megan exhaled sharply, muted the call, and slipped the phone back into her bag. He had been calling and texting all day, ever since she'd told him about the Michigan trip. Not asking permission, just telling him. Because legally, she didn't need his consent for this vacation. She was exhausted from always having to ask permission just to be a mother. The phone buzzed again. Then again. James glanced over, then back at her. His face stayed calm, unreadable, free of judgment. "Sorry," Megan murmured. "My ex-husband. He's not thrilled about this trip." "The Michigan trip?" James asked. She nodded. "He thinks I'm being impulsive. That Zoe needs stability, not adventures." She didn't add the rest. That Scott had accused her of trying to compensate for guilt with grand gestures, that she should stop performing motherhood and focus on truly understanding her child. That he was considering filing for primary custody, because, as he'd said, Zoe deserves a parent who can actually communicate with her. James let out a thoughtful hum. Does Zoe like stability and routine? A question that sounded simple, yet froze Megan where she sat. Did Zoe like routine? She honestly didn't know. Did Zoe like routine? Probably. She ate the same breakfast every morning, followed the same bedtime ritual every night, and carried that old purple turtle backpack everywhere she went. But was that her choice? Or just a habit shaped by the way her mother lived? Was Zoe truly being herself? Or merely becoming the version of herself she thought her mother wanted to see? "I don't know," Megan admitted, her voice barely a whisper. And in that moment, the honesty felt like failure. James didn't respond right away. He looked over at Zoe, who was now bent over her tablet, drawing something with full concentration, the tip of her tongue sticking out slightly. A childish habit Megan had seen countless times, but had never really noticed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and soft, just enough that Zoe, even if she could hear, wouldn't catch it. "My wife left when Harper was 2, he said. "She said she couldn't handle having a special child." He lifted his fingers to make air quotes, his mouth twisting into a bitter half-smile. "At the time, I worked for a big corporation. Great salary, fancy title, inhuman hours. I'd get home after Harper was asleep and leave before she woke up. I convinced myself that providing was enough, that money could make up for not being there." He paused, interlacing his rough hands, squeezing them tight, then releasing. "And one day, she was just gone. Left a note saying she'd tried, but she wasn't made for this kind of life. And since I was never really present anyway, I might as well handle it on my own." Megan sat still, a mixture of shock and empathy tightening her chest. "James, I'm so sorry." He shrugged slightly, a small gesture, but one that revealed how deeply that pain had been buried. "Honestly, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Back then, it felt like the end of the world, but looking back, it was the turning point. I quit my job, became a carpenter. No more 6-figure salary, but flexible hours, enough to live. And most importantly, I got to be there. Really be there." He lifted his calloused hands into the light, veins raised beneath tanned skin. "I learned ASL like my life depended on it. Because in a way, Harper's life did depend on it. Her joy, her identity, her connection to the world, all of it went through these hands." He looked down at them, then gave a faint, wistful smile. "I made mistakes, too. God, so many. But I learned something. Being present doesn't mean showing up. You can sit in the same room with your kid and still be miles apart. The words landed on Megan like a heavy blanket, pressing against her chest. She thought of her penthouse apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, curated artwork, elegant furniture. She thought of Zoe's room, full of educational toys, assistive devices, everything money could buy, interpreters, tutors, therapists, all things she'd paid for and labeled as love. She had mistaken providing for parenting. "I am there," she said quietly, her voice close to breaking. "I eat breakfast with her, check her homework, sign what I can." James nodded slowly. "I believe you," he said. "But can you tell me what Zoe's favorite color is?" Megan froze. Of course she knew. It was purple. The backpack, her bedroom walls, even half her wardrobe. All purple. "Purple," she said firmly. James smiled softly, then turned to Zoe and signed something. Zoe looked up, eyes bright, her little hands moving fast, before bursting into a soundless giggle. James turned back, his smile gentle. "She says her favorite color used to be purple. Now it's teal, like the ocean. She changed her mind 4 months ago, after you took her to the aquarium. 4 months ago." Megan froze. She remembered that day vividly, a rare Saturday morning without meetings, when she'd spontaneously decided to take Zoe to the aquarium. Zoe had been mesmerized by the jellyfish tank, pressing her tiny palm against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. Megan had taken a picture, posted it on Instagram, captioned it, "Quality time with my girl," then spent the rest of the trip replying to work emails. She hadn't even noticed that, in that very moment, her daughter had fallen in love with a new color. James seemed to catch something in her eyes. He reached across the table and gave her hand a brief, warm, sincere squeeze. "Hey, you're here, right now. You're trying. And that matters." Megan pressed her lips together, her throat tightening. She wasn't sure if that was true, or if trying was ever enough. Trying sounded like a consolation prize, when Zoe deserved a gold medal. Her phone buzzed again. She looked down. 3 new messages from Scott, each more urgent than the last. The final one made her stomach knot. "If you get on that plane, I'll file for emergency custody Monday morning. Zoe deserves a parent who can actually communicate with her. And we both know that isn't you." Megan stared at the words until they blurred. The awful thing was, Scott wasn't wrong. She couldn't communicate with Zoe. Not in the way that truly mattered. She knew how to manage. She could get through each day. But she wasn't connecting. James was saying something, but all she heard was a faint ringing in her ears. She stood up abruptly, muttered an apology, and nearly ran toward the restroom at the end of the hall. Inside, she locked the stall door, pressed her back against the cold wall, and tried to breathe. Just breathe. The air felt thick. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere beyond the tiled walls, a baby was crying, muffled, distant, heavy. Megan leaned her forehead against the cold metal door, and she wondered why she had ever thought Michigan was a good idea in the first place. Megan had once imagined this trip. Long walks where no words were needed, only the comfort of shared silence and the stillness of nature around them. She had pictured the hotel room with attentive room service and subtitled movies that Zoe always loved to watch. She had imagined that somehow, simply by changing the scenery, by trading one city for another, one atmosphere for another, she would magically become the kind of mother Zoe deserved. But now, sitting in the cold, sterile airport restroom, she understood. You can't run away from your own shortcomings. You can't patch over 7 years of distance with 1 week in Traverse City. Her phone buzzed again, Another message from Scott. This time it was a screenshot of a legal document. He wasn't bluffing. He really was going to file for custody. And maybe he should. Maybe Zoe would be better off with a father. Flawed, yes, but at least honest about his limits. Scott had never pretended to be anything else. He'd been upfront about not believing ASL was essential, that technology and medical intervention were the future, that if Zoe just tried hard enough, she could live like a normal person. Megan had fought him over that. She had insisted that Zoe needed to be immersed in deaf culture, to be proud of herself, of her language, of her identity. She had truly believed she was right. But now she saw herself for what she was, a hypocrite. She had preached about ASL as something sacred, yet never mastered it herself. She had talked about the deaf community, though Zoe had never had a single deaf friend. She had built an entire philosophy of parenting and failed to live by it. The knocking on the stall door startled her. "Occupied," she said, her voice catching. But the knocking came again, louder this time. Megan frowned, unlocked the door, ready to unleash her irritation at whoever couldn't take a hint, and froze. James stood there, right inside the women's restroom. He looked both awkward and determined, like a man who knew he shouldn't be there, but had decided he needed to be anyway. "You can't be in here," she said flatly. "I know," he replied. "Zoe was worried. She saw your face before you left." He shifted his stance, lowering his voice. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, and you don't have to tell me. But that kid out there, she adores you. I can see it. The way she looks at you, like you're her whole sky. Whatever you think you're failing at, Zoe doesn't see it that way." Megan laughed, a broken, hoarse sound. "She doesn't see it because she's 6, and I'm all she's got. But she deserves more. She deserves someone who can actually talk to her, who understands when she's happy, scared, or sad. Someone who doesn't need a translation app to speak to her own daughter." The words spilled out before she could stop them. Her dad's right. I'm not enough. I thought love, money, and good intentions were enough. But they're not. Zoe needs someone better than me. James was silent for a long time. A woman entered, froze at the sight of them, blushed furiously, muttered an apology, and backed out. He barely noticed. Finally, he said softly, "Can I tell you something about Harper?" Megan wiped her tears and nodded. "When she was 4, he began, she asked me why I talked funny. My ASL was awful back then. I was learning, but I kept messing up, signing backwards, confusing similar signs, unable to keep up when she got excited." He gave a small laugh, but there was pain beneath it. "I remember panicking, thinking, God, I'm ruining this kid. Harper needs a deaf parent, or at least someone fluent, not me, this clumsy guy who can barely get through a sentence." He paused, gaze distant. "Then I apologized to her. I told her I'd try to learn faster. And you know what she said?" He smiled faintly. "She said, 'Daddy talks with his heart.' That's my favorite language." Something cracked open in Megan's chest. Her voice trembled. "Zoe deserves someone who can speak with both heart and hands." "Maybe," James said, nodding gently, eyes warm. "Or maybe she just needs someone who's willing to learn, to keep learning, to never quit, to stay even when it's hard. Kids don't need perfect parents, Megan. They need present ones, the kind who stumble, fall, and get back up, because they believe their kids are worth it." He stepped back, one hand on the door, checking that the hallway outside was clear. "That flight to Michigan, that is the effort. Don't let fear, or guilt, or your ex's threats convince you it doesn't matter." With that, he opened the door, murmured an apology to the woman still waiting, and disappeared down the hallway. Megan stood there, motionless. She looked at herself in the mirror. Mascara smudged, designer blouse wrinkled, the reflection of a woman who had once believed she had control over everything, now slowly unraveling. But somewhere in that reflection, something new flickered. Fragile, but real. She looked like someone who had lost her way. Or maybe someone who was finally starting to find it again. Megan drew a deep breath, splashed cold water on her face, straightened her blouse, and walked out of the restroom, back toward gate 23, where Zoe was waiting. When Zoe saw her mother return, her whole face lit up, like the sun breaking through gray clouds. She signed rapidly, her small hands fluttering in worry and relief. Megan tried to follow. She caught the signs for okay, Mom, and maybe sad. She knelt in front of the chair, bringing herself level with her daughter, meeting those deep, dark eyes. Eyes that always watched, always read the world in silence, and had always been waiting for something from her mother. Megan lifted her hands and began to sign, slowly, deliberately, each word handled like something fragile and precious. "I'm okay. I love you." "I'm sorry." Zoe's tiny hands rose to respond, her movements patient and gentle enough to make Megan's heart ache. "I love you too. Don't be sorry. You're here." Just a few signs, but they carried an entire world of forgiveness. Megan pulled her daughter into her arms, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her small, familiar body. Zoe wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, holding tight, as if afraid that letting go would make her disappear. And in that moment, no words were needed at all. When they finally drew apart, Zoe tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed to the tablet on her lap. On the screen was a drawing, vibrant, detailed, full of color. 3 people, a woman, a man, and a little girl, with a purple turtle backpack. Above them, in uneven but clearly written letters, were the words, "My new friend, his daughter, and me." Megan felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said softly, then signed it again, slowly, carefully, just clear enough for Zoe to understand. Zoe smiled, then began to sign a longer chain of phrases, her face shifting with every emotion like ripples across a quiet lake. Joy, excitement, tenderness, vulnerability. Megan caught only fragments. Learn. Fast. Stories. The rest slipped away, lost in the graceful blur of her daughter's hands. She looked toward James, who was sitting a few seats away, pretending to scroll through his phone to give them privacy. "James," she called quietly. He looked up. She gestured toward Zoe, a small, helpless shrug, a silent plea for help. James watched Zoe for a moment, reading her signs carefully, then nodded. "She's asking," he translated gently, "if you can learn to sign faster, so you can keep up with her stories. Zoe says she has so many things she wants to tell you." The words washed over Megan like a wave. Of course, Zoe had stories. Every child did. Dreams, fears, moments of wonder and laughter, the tiny things that made up a childhood. But Megan had missed all of them. Not because Zoe didn't want to share, but because she'd never created the space for her daughter to do so. "Yes," Megan said softly, her voice trembling but certain. She lifted her hands, signing carefully, clearly, one word at a time. "Yes, I will learn. I promise." And this time, she meant it. Not as a task to complete, but as a bridge to build. Not with intellect, but with heart. Zoe signed again, quick and eager. Megan understood only half, but instead of nodding and pretending, as she used to, she gently touched her daughter's hand and signed, "Slower. I want to understand," and Zoe's face lit up, not because her mother understood, but because her mother wanted to, because for the first time, she wasn't pretending. Zoe signed again, slowly, clearly, patiently. She was teaching her mother. Not for the first time, but for the first time, her mother was truly listening. "I want," Zoe signed carefully, eyes never leaving Megan's, "to tell you about Harper." Megan smiled. Tears welled again, but this time they came from joy, not sorrow. She signed back, "I want to listen." And Zoe began to tell her story, slowly, bit by bit. Whenever Megan frowned in confusion, Zoe stopped and explained with soft, graceful movements. Megan listened, not as a mother fulfilling a duty, but as a mother who truly wanted to understand her child. For the first time, at noisy Gate 23 of Detroit Airport, they were truly talking. Not with words, but with love, in the shape of two hands learning how to find each other. James quietly watched the mother and daughter for a moment, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. When Zoe paused to sip her water, he leaned toward Megan, his voice low and gentle. "You're doing really well." Megan gave a faint, uneven smile. "No, I'm not. I'm tripping over every sign. Zoe has to stop every 3 words." James smiled kindly. "Yes, and she's being patient, because for the first time she sees you trying, not trying to be good enough, but trying to understand her." He paused, eyes following Zoe, as she fished a snack from her purple turtle backpack. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. What's Zoe's best friend's name at school?" Megan opened her mouth and closed it again. Silence. She didn't know. Zoe had friends. The interpreter had told her so. Zoe's very social. She gets along well with everyone. But the names of those friends? She'd never heard Zoe mention even one. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. James nodded, not judging, just encouraging her to keep going. "What about her favorite food?" "Pasta," Megan answered immediately. "She eats pasta all the time?" "What kind?" Megan hesitated. The simple question felt like a blade turning in her chest. Zoe ate pasta, but because she liked it, or because it was what her mother ordered? Because it was quick, easy, and didn't require much conversation? She took a shaky breath. "I'm not sure." James nodded slowly. "What is she afraid of?" he asked, still in that calm, unpressured tone. "Not big fears. I mean the small ones. The kind only children have," Megan tried to think. "The dark?" "No. Zoe slept fine without a nightlight." "Thunder?" "No." She couldn't hear it. "Bugs? Strangers?" "No." She wasn't sure at all. 7 years of motherhood. And she didn't know what scared her own daughter. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. James stayed quiet for a moment, as if honoring that silence. Then he spoke softly. "When Harper was 6, the same age as Zoe, I thought I was doing great, too. She went to school, ate well, slept on time. Everything seemed fine. Until her teacher called me one day. Harper had a meltdown at school, crying uncontrollably, refusing to use the restroom." He looked down at his rough, calloused hands. Turns out, she was terrified of automatic toilets. The sudden flush, the vibration, the unexpected splash. It scared her. She never knew when it would happen, so she just held it in. For 2 years. 2 years, Megan. And I, the dad who thought he was always there, had no idea. "She didn't tell you?" Megan asked softly. "I asked her that too," he said, smiling sadly. She said, "I thought every kid was scared of those. I thought I just had to be brave." He lifted his gaze to meet hers, Kids don't always tell us things. Sometimes they need to be asked. Sometimes they just need to know that we want to know. Not to fix it, not to solve it, but simply to understand. Megan turned to look at Zoe, calmly munching on a granola bar, eyes fixed on her tablet, peaceful and focused. Her daughter, the one she thought she knew. The one she'd provided for, protected, loved. And yet, she realized now, she didn't know her at all. "How do I even start?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do I learn my own child again?" James smiled, his eyes soft like late afternoon light. "The same way you learn any language. One word at a time, one conversation at a time. And don't be afraid to get it wrong." He nodded toward Zoe. "She's the most patient teacher you'll ever have. She already knows you want to learn. Now you just have to show her you're ready to be the student." Megan took a deep breath, then gently touched Zoe's shoulder. The little girl looked up, eyes curious. Megan signed slowly, each movement deliberate and careful. "I want to learn. Will you teach me?" Zoe's face lit up as if someone had switched on a light inside her. She nodded eagerly, then started signing, but stopped halfway, remembering her mother needed a slower pace. Zoe signed one word, waited. Megan copied it. Zoe nodded, grinning. Another word. This one Megan recognized. "Friend." She repeated it, a bit clumsy. Zoe clapped, her smile spreading wide. Then she signed something more complex, breaking it into smaller parts when she saw her mother hesitate. James watched them, his eyes softening, a quiet mix of hope and faith. "Hey," he said after a moment. "Harper and I live near Sleeping Bear Dunes. It's not far from Traverse City. If you two have time this week, maybe we could meet up. Let the girls play together?" Megan looked up, surprised. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't," James interrupted gently, smiling. "Harper would love it. She doesn't get many deaf friends visiting. And—" he paused briefly. "Sometimes it helps to have someone who's already walked this road. Not to tell you what to do, just to remind you you're not alone." Megan swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I'd like that. Thank you." James took out his phone. "Want to exchange numbers?" They entered their contact information, and just then, the airport speakers crackled to life. "Flight 237 to Traverse City is now boarding all passengers." Around them, travelers began gathering their bags and lining up as usual. James stood, offering his hand. "Looks like we're on the same flight." Megan took it. The calloused, warm, steady hand. "Looks like it." Zoe slipped on her turtle backpack, her tiny hand sliding into her mother's. The three of them walked toward the gate. An unlikely trio, bound together by language, patience, and something quietly beginning to grow. As Megan handed over her boarding pass, her phone buzzed again. Sender, Scott. Almost certainly another threat, another demand, another reminder that she was doing it wrong. She silenced it, didn't look, slipped the phone into her pocket. For the next week, she would answer no calls. For the next week, she would simply be a mother, learning to listen not with her ears, but with her heart. The plane lifted off the runway under the golden sunset of Michigan. Amber light poured through the window, bathing the cabin in a warm, honey-colored glow. Zoe pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide as the world below shrank, houses turning into tiny squares, roads into glowing threads that wound across the fading earth. Her small hands began to move, dancing through the air, telling her mother about the clouds, the birds, the little cars still crawling far below. Megan sat beside her, quietly watching. Not just looking at the movements, but seeing them. Not just noticing the shapes of her daughter's hands, but trying to feel the meaning behind them. She recognized a few familiar words. White, cotton, probably talking about clouds. Then fly. Then a new sign she didn't know, one that she guessed meant free. After that, Zoe pointed downward, signing a long, flowing stream, too fast for Megan to catch more than fragments. She could have nodded along. She could have smiled and pretended to understand, like she'd done thousands of times before. But this time, she didn't. This time, Megan gently touched her daughter's hand. Not to interrupt, but as an invitation. She signed slowly, each word distinct and careful. Slower. I want to understand everything. Zoe turned, eyes wide in surprise. Then, slowly, something appeared on her small face. First confusion, then hope, and finally, pure joy. She nodded, began again. This time, slower. This time with the kind of patience no 6-year-old should have to learn, but Zoe had, from too many times waiting for her mother. Clouds, she signed, pausing for her mother's nod. Like, pause. Cotton. Megan nodded, signed back. Cotton. Yes, Zoe giggled, her face shining like the sunlight glancing off the window pane. I want, she paused, looked at her mother, to touch, see, if soft. Megan nodded, signing again, slower, but steady. You want to touch the clouds to see if they're soft? Zoe clapped silently, her whole body trembling with excitement. Mom understands. Mom really understands. She kept signing, faster now, with growing confidence, talking about wanting to fly like birds, about imagining people who lived on clouds, about a picture she'd once drawn in class. A city in the sky. Megan didn't understand everything. She missed signs, fumbled others, but this time she asked. And Zoe, with the patience of a child who had waited her whole life to be understood, taught her again. Across the aisle, James watched quietly. When Megan glanced up, he gave a small nod, a look that said, without words, "You're doing it right. Keep going." Megan smiled back, and she thought, maybe, just maybe, for the first time in her life, she truly was. 20 minutes later, the beverage cart rolled down the aisle. Zoe tugged at her mother's sleeve, signing, "You tired?" Megan thought about it. Yes, she was tired. Her head tight like a drawn string, eyes burning from the effort, hands trembling from keeping up with every movement. But it wasn't the exhaustion of defeat. It was the good kind, like muscles being used the way they were meant to be, like a mind stretching into new space. She smiled and signed back. No, I'm happy. For the first time in her life, she signed a sentence she hadn't rehearsed, hadn't looked up, hadn't practiced in front of a mirror. She spoke from her heart, not her head. I love talking with you. Zoe froze for a moment, eyes softening. She reached out, took her mother's hand, not to sign, just to hold it. They sat like that, side by side, gazing through the window as the sky shifted from gold to violet, then slowly into night. After a while, Zoe lifted her hands again, signing, "Can I ask something?" "Of course." Zoe bit her lower lip, eyes shining with both hope and hesitation. "Can we meet Harper? For real?" Megan nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I'll call James as soon as we land." Zoe smiled, then signed again, slower this time, more careful. "And the summer camp? For deaf kids?" Megan remembered what James had said. A summer camp Harper went to every year. A place where kids like Zoe could play, learn, belong. She thought of all the times she had said no. No to deaf community events. Too busy. No to parent groups. Afraid of being judged. No to opportunities to connect. because she was scared to face her own inadequacy. She had said no so often that she'd forgotten how to say yes. She took a deep breath, then signed, "Yes. We'll look into it. If you want to go, you'll go." Zoe squealed silently, throwing her arms around her mother's neck, hugging tight. Megan felt her daughter's small body tremble. Maybe from laughter, maybe from tears, maybe both. When Zoe looked up again, her eyes sparkled. She signed a quick, excited string of words. Megan caught only a few, but enough to understand. "Thank you." "Mom." "Happy." Megan smiled, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She signed back, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm happy too." And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. A flight attendant passed by, handing out snacks as the cabin lights dimmed. Zoe leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, her tablet resting quietly on her lap. She wasn't drawing or signing, just sitting in peace. The kind of peace only a child who feels completely safe can know. Megan looked out the window, at the sky darkening to deep indigo. Somewhere below lay Traverse City, Sleeping Bear Dunes, and a week ahead meant just for the two of them. She wasn't naive enough to think everything would be perfect. A week couldn't repair 7 years of distance. She would still stumble, still miss things, still need Zoe's patience. But this time, she wouldn't pretend. This time, she would ask. And maybe that was all Zoe had ever needed. Not a perfect mother, but one who truly tried. The plane began to descend. Megan's ears popped from the pressure change. She turned to Zoe, who was half asleep, but still aware enough to feel the shift. Megan gently touched her daughter's shoulder and signed, "You okay?" Zoe smiled, nodded, then signed back. 3 simple words. "Okay." With Mom, 3 words. But for Megan, they meant the beginning of everything new. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt. Cabin lights flicked on, and the usual rustle began, seatbelts unclicking, overhead bins opening, passengers eager to stand and queue in the narrow aisle. Megan didn't rush. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't thinking about the next meeting, the unread emails, or the endless to-do list. She was here, with Zoe. The little girl pressed her face to the window, trying to see the runway lights through the dark. When the plane came to a full stop, she turned and signed, "We're here!" "We're here," Megan signed back. But in her mind, those words meant more. Not just arriving in Traverse City, but arriving at a new beginning. Arriving at a way of living where she would stop running, and finally, start staying. They waited patiently as the rows ahead of them filed out. James stood, pulled his duffel from the overhead bin, and looked back. "Got a ride arranged?" "I'm renting a car," Megan said. He hesitated for a second. "If you'd like, I can give you a lift." "I'm passing through Traverse City on my way back to Sleeping Bear Dunes. We can set up a time for Harper and Zoe to meet." Megan knew she should probably refuse. They'd only met a few hours ago. But sometimes, strangers stop being strangers the moment they see you at your most vulnerable, and choose not to look away. "We'd appreciate that," she said. Outside, the Michigan night was crisp and dry, scented faintly with pine and the cool breath of Lake Michigan somewhere beyond the hills. Overhead, the sky shimmered with more stars than she'd seen in Detroit. Stars that city lights could never hide here. Zoe tilted her face upward, lips parted in awe. She began signing rapidly. Many, bright, and maybe beautiful. "Yes," Megan signed back. "Beautiful." In James's old pickup, the worn leather seats smelling faintly of sawdust and cedar, Zoe quickly fell asleep in the back, her head resting against the window. Megan watched her through the rearview mirror. Streetlights flashed across the child's peaceful face, painting it with thin blankets of gold. She looked simply like a child again, free from the constant effort of slowing herself down, of making her feelings easier for others to grasp. "You're doing something brave," James said quietly, eyes on the road. "Coming here. Admitting you don't know how. Being willing to learn." "I don't feel brave," Megan confessed. "I feel scared, like I've wasted too much time, and now I'm racing the clock." "You are racing it," James said, not to comfort but to be honest. "None of us get back the time we've lost. But we do get to decide how to use what's left." He paused, his voice steady in the hum of the tires. "Harper's 12. 6 more years, and she'll be off to college. I count the days, not because I want her gone, but because I want to be sure I don't waste any. Every breakfast, every talk, even every argument matters, because they're finite." Megan swallowed hard. "Zoe's 6. You've got 12 years, he continued. "It sounds long, but it'll go faster than you think." "So where do I start?" Megan asked quietly. "There's so much to learn. ASL, deaf culture, the community. Things I should have known years ago." James smiled faintly in the dark. "Start tomorrow. Wake up and ask Zoe what she wants to do. Ask like you mean it. Not to confirm your plan, but to hear hers. When she answers, listen. Really listen. If you don't understand, ask her to slow down, to show you again. And when she shares something, put the phone down." He glanced toward her. "Language isn't just words, Megan. It's attention. It's priority. It's saying to someone, 'You matter enough for me to struggle through this.'" The truck pulled up in front of the small Bayview hotel she'd booked. Zoe was still sound asleep, breathing softly. "Thank you," Megan said, "for everything. Not just the ride." "We're friends now," James replied with an easy grin. "Friends do that." "Oh," Harper just texted. "She wants to know if Zoe's free tomorrow to go to the beach. Just a walk, nothing big, so they can hang out." Megan thought of the itinerary she'd built. Museums, guided tours, dinner reservations, all the things she used to fill the silence, to avoid confronting the truth that she didn't know how to simply be with her daughter. "We'd love that," she said. And this time, she meant it. Inside the room, Megan helped Zoe change into pajamas. The child stirred halfway through, eyes half open with sleep. As she pulled the blanket up, Zoe signed something. Slow, drowsy, barely readable in the dim light. But Megan was certain she understood. "I love you too," she signed back. Zoe smiled, eyes closing, body turning toward the warmth. Megan sat on the opposite bed, watching her daughter sleep. She picked up her phone. 57 unread messages, 23 missed calls. Mostly from Scott, the rest from work. She could open them. She could let them devour the fragile calm she'd just built. Instead, she powered the phone off. Not silent. Off. Completely. Then she opened her laptop, typed ASL classes near me. Then, summer camps for deaf children Michigan. Then, how to support deaf kids when you're a hearing parent. She had so much to learn. So many years to make up for. But for the first time in 7 years, she felt she was finally facing the right direction. The next day, on the sand of Sleeping Bear Dunes, Megan watched Zoe and Harper run along the shoreline. 2 little figures chatting in their own language, a flurry of hands and laughter that carried no sound, yet somehow filled the air like music. James stood beside her. Both of them silent, smiling whenever their daughters laughed. That laughter without sound, the purest music there was. "You know," James said, "last night Harper asked if Zoe could be her little sister." Megan laughed, blinking back tears. Zoe drew a picture with Harper in it. She called her my new sister. James chuckled, eyes crinkling. We could do worse. Two girls who found each other, and two adults who finally understand that love sometimes means struggling, failing, and trying again. Megan looked at her daughter, really looked, and thought about all the conversations still waiting for them. The stories Zoe would tell. The years ahead spent learning a language not just of hands, but of the heart. It wouldn't be perfect. She'd still make mistakes, still miss things, still need Zoe's patience. But she would be there. Truly there. And maybe, in the end, that was what mattered most. Zoe turned and waved for her mother to join. She signed quickly, gleefully. Megan couldn't catch it all. But instead of nodding vaguely, she walked down onto the damp sand, knelt to meet her daughter's eyes, and signed, one more time. Slower. I want to understand, and Zoe, with the brightest smile Megan had ever seen, began again. One word at a time, one sign at a time, one story at a time, teaching her mother the language she should have learned long ago, but was finally ready to embrace. The language of love. The language of connection. The language that doesn't need perfection. Only sincerity. Under the Michigan sun, with the waves murmuring a song neither of them could hear but both could feel, mother and daughter began again. Not from the starting line, but from exactly where they stood. Together. At last. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next journey of healing. Have you ever shared a language that was yours alone with someone you love? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to read it.